Hello and good afternoon. Thank you for coming out to our presentation. My name is Marcus Kramer. I'm the Chief Operating Officer of Lemm Technologies.
And my name is Rush Bartlett. I'm the Director of Corporate Strategy. And at Lemm Technologies, we're trying a bold vision. And that is trying to make the entire in vitro blood diagnostics market non-invasive. And what we're doing is we're starting in the glucose market because there are 23 million diabetics in the United States and 200 million worldwide. 90% of these are type 2 diabetics. These are the people that have to prick their finger 5 to 8 times a day to manage their disease. First, you're supposed to sterilize the pad of your finger, which almost nobody ever does. Then you have to prick your finger. Then you have to pull that blood just a little bit, and then use a test strip and a glucose meter to measure that blood. This whole process can take as much as 10 minutes for someone who doesn't have a lot of dexterity, or a couple of minutes for someone who does, and is generally just seen as kind of a pain. But the market loves it because it's a razor blade model. You can give away these very sexy looking, cool glucose meters, but at the same time, get someone to fork over $2,000 on test strips annually. Now, there's been some notable failures, or valiant efforts, if you will, to try to solve this problem before. GlucoWatch is the most well-known because it's the only non-invasive device to ever receive FDA approval. It was approved in 2001 and then pulled from the market in 2003. The reason it was pulled is because 50% of the people that used the GlucoWatch got second and third degree burns, because what they were doing is taking those little metal pads there, shooting a short electrical impulse across the skin, and then sucking the glucose out of your body so they could measure it. People, yeah. So it worked great if it was used precisely and accurately according to the precise instructions with little sensor pads that were placed between the skin and the device to protect the user. But because the sensor pads cost $4,700 a year to use continuously, a lot of people were either waiting too long to change them, or not using them, or incorrectly applying them, and thus causing the safety issue. Census Medical Systems represents one of many companies that have tried using light or infrared light across the skin to measure blood glucose. They spent over $100 million in about 2 decades discovering you can't measure glucose concentration across the skin. But what they did discover was that you can effectively measure glucose accurately in a glass or plastic cuvette if you have a clear window to read across. And that significantly advanced the field to where it is today. This is just a prototype concept from Kisley Kunjan, who's one of the technical advisors to the company, of something he worked on in 2008. It's a system where you pipe blood out, you pipe blood through a flow cell, and you pipe blood back into the body. This was able to show that you can detect blood glucose in real time from a person using infrared light, but if you've got to connect an IV line, it's really invasive and it's not really practical. But that got us thinking if there was a way to do this with a site on the body that already existed.
And so what we did at Lemm Technologies was we looked at this and we said, is there a way to measure blood glucose non-invasively in the current measurement site, the pad of the finger, that would allow you to use, say, a window into the body? And we found that it's already been discovered by other researchers. Basically, the fingernail. But the problem was they all tried to measure down through the top of the fingernail and out the bottom of the finger. And when you do that, you're going through the skin on the bottom of the finger, and you can't measure blood glucose through the skin. And we looked at this problem and we said, is there another way to go through the nail where you don't have to go through the skin of the finger? And we found that indeed you can. By going across the curvature of the nail, you can go from nail to blood to nail again with your infrared light, avoid the skin entirely, and therefore be able to measure blood glucose non-invasively. We have currently completed our proof of concept studies, moving into our prototype design phase. Shown above me are the 3 concept designs for our initial products to reach the market. From left to right, we have our point of care disposable unit. And this will be mainly marketed to hospitals where the sanitary issues of the hospital requires that they dispose the unit after every patient. The second is our continuous blood glucose monitor. And that is for the juvenile diabetic patient population, which is type 1, but it's much smaller than the type 2 population, and will allow for them to continuously monitor their blood glucose concentrations over time. Our third and final, shown on the right, is our point of care, or our home blood glucose monitor, meant to disrupt and replace the current needle stick technology that is used in home blood glucose monitoring. In our initial proof of concept studies, we demonstrated that we can detect blood glucose through nail and glucose concentrations through nail using infrared light. However, we understand that just detection isn't as important as measurement. And so, the second part of our proof of concept studies, we measured changes in glucose concentrations in solution. Finally, we measured changes in blood glucose concentrations from human blood using infrared light. Now, we've done an extensive prior art search as part of our review of this technology. And what we found is that all of the other technologies failed for three main reasons, and they all have to do with the measurement site. The first two, the weak signal and the high noise, are specifically due to measuring through the skin. And mainly, if you avoid the skin, you can avoid these problems. The third one, measurement lag time, is because you try and measure blood glucose concentration from somewhere that's not the blood, such as, say, the eye or the solution inside your eye. Now, the problem is that solution concentration lags behind your actual blood glucose concentration, sometimes upwards of 30 minutes to an hour, and isn't really useful for a diabetic who's trying to monitor their diabetes. There's two other things we found in our prior art search. First, that the initial patents on detection of blood glucose and measurement of blood glucose using infrared technology were issued 25 years ago and have since expired. All of the new patents in this field focus on two things: the measurement orientation and the measurement compartment, or basically where you're getting your concentration from. Therefore, in our provisional applications, we focus on these two main components of our patents. Patenting the lateral use of spectroscopy across the neck to measure blood analytes non-invasively. And we left it broad to blood analytes so that we could expand into other markets. But what's most important about these patent applications and this technology is it's not some pet project out of a university. It's not someone else's idea. This technology was developed by myself and Rush, is owned and operated on by us and Lemm Technologies with no license agreement or requirements for any other person or user. Now, we've done extensive FDA review because we recognize that any medical device getting to the market requires FDA clearance. We've determined that our device will be classified as a Class 2 medical device. This will require a pre-market approval process in clinical trials. Now, we understand clinical trials, and we've modeled them after the GlucoWatch clinical trials, and will only require around 450 patients. But these will be extremely short clinical trials because it's not a wound care, it's not something that's ingested, it's not a drug, and it's not a device that's implanted. The patients have to come in, we compare our blood glucose measurement to the gold standard in the market for 12 to 24 hours, we send them home, and they're done. We don't have to do any more monitoring of those patients, which means our trials will be short and sweet. Now, the blood diagnostic market as a whole is a massive market, $39 billion a year. Our initial focus is the blood glucose market, which occupies approximately 40% of that total market, and that's our initial target. Now, this blood glucose market is $15 billion a year and is growing year over year over year, globally and in the US. Now, we understand that there are a lot of big players in this market: Roche, Johnson & Johnson, Abbott. But we honestly don't care too much what they did, how they did it, where they did it, or why they did it, because they all did it the same way, using invasive blood glucose monitoring technology, and they all stand to lose a lot of their market share when our technology is commercialized.
Now, we're not naive enough to think that we're the only ones that have ever tried this. And we're not naive enough to think that we're the only ones that are trying this now. Therapeutics and C8 Medi sensors are the two, for all intents and purposes, lead companies in this space. Echo uses an ultrasonic electric pre-treatment, kind of like the GlucoWatch, and then an ultrasonic impulse to suck out that glucose. It requires a 1-hour warm-up period, and because of this, it's only good for the continuous glucose monitoring space. Same thing with C8 Medi sensors. They're claiming they're using Raman spectroscopy across the skin to measure glucose. But because they have a 30-minute warm-up period, and again, they have to apply a special optical gel, and you have to have a very clean site for measurement, this is only good for continuous glucose monitoring. PreciseSense is not a non-invasive company, but it represents kind of the invasive continuous blood glucose monitoring space that a type 1 diabetic typically does. It's essentially just a better type of sensor that increases the life it can be used in the body from 3 to 4 days to about a week before it has to be changed. And the interesting thing is that Medtronic reviewed all of these companies and many others in 2009, and acquired PreciseSense instead of anyone else that can do it non-invasively, continuously, because they thought that this was more valuable than these technologies. But they all operate in the continuous glucose monitoring field, which is about 4% of the overall monitoring market. Now, our strategy at Lemm is to validate our product in humans, take it to the FDA, and then get a strategic partnership with one of those 4 main medical device companies for marketing of this product. We're going to individually parse up this technology into those 3 segments that Marcus showed you, so that our first application, the point-of-care home use product that a traditional type 2 diabetic would use at home, we market off to, say, Roche. They're going to take that, give us an upfront payment and some licensing revenues on royalties, which we will then use as a non-dilutive source of income to fund other products and other parts of the non-invasive diagnostic market for other blood technologies. Now, different acquisitions at different points obviously create different amounts of revenues. Medisense and Therasense were acquired by Abbott for about $2 billion together to form the Abbott Diabetes Care Division. They're, for all intents and purposes, pretty mature companies when they were acquired. Anamis was acquired by J&J. It's an insulin pump company, but it also had the GlucoWatch patent portfolio. And they were acquired for $500 million, which shows that there's even some value in failure because this is such a hyper-competitive space. And PreciseSense, as I mentioned earlier, acquired by Medtronic for $27 million prior to any FDA approval. Now, from our financials, the key thing to take note is we believe we can sell our device at the $1,500 price point. That is the low end of what the average type 2 diabetic spends on their traditional glucose testing strips every year. And because we can manufacture this for $27 or less, which is what current pulse ox technology goes for, and that's essentially the same exact sensor and diode that we're using, just a different wavelength and a different orientation, the margins on this are absolutely incredible. And the market is huge, so if we capture less than 1% of that, it's $168 million in revenue. Also, this is not just a one-time sale. Because our LED in our system will expire just like any other light that has a finite shelf life, we expect recurring revenue streams every 2 years or so based on prior literature we've done with a continuous LED source emitter. We have a 5-phase launch plan to get there, which is going to help reduce the risk of this technology as it goes. Phase 1 was feasibility and risk reduction. Can you measure blood glucose using infrared light, and can you do that through a fingernail? We did that ourselves on rented equipment, staying very lean, spending $7,500 of our own money, while we were also completing our PhD research. Now we're moving into the prototype phase. We've just graduated from our PhDs, and we're working with a $25,000 investment that's part of awards and additional capital from myself and Marcus to take this and purchase materials to use for a benchtop level prototype where we can actually insert human fingers. Phase 3 is a commercial prototype development launch plan. We would work with a group like Medi Technologies in Indianapolis or the Battelle Memorial Institute in Columbus, Ohio, who I've worked with before on a previous medical device project. They would take this, do human factors engineering, and make sure that we have a 1,000 unit production run of pilot products at the end of this phase, half of which would be done through device master file testing for mechanical testing, and half of which would be done for a human trial, which is in phase 4, and then finally we would then launch in phase 5. Now, I've known Marcus for a long time. He's been one of my best friends throughout graduate school, and he's got double bachelor's degrees in chemistry and biochemistry and a PhD in biomedical engineering. He's also one of the most capable individuals I know at Purdue with 9 peer-reviewed journal publications and a book chapter, and he does all this while he gets no sleep because he just has a 4-month-old son. And myself, I've got a bachelor's degree in chemical engineering, but don't worry, Aggies, I have a lot of good Aggie friends too. I got that at Texas. I also have an MBA and a PhD in biomedical engineering, and I'm a previous Rice success story. My company that got third 2 years ago has since been venture funded for $1 million and is working with the Battelle Memorial Institute to commercialize the product for some interesting applications. Because of that activity, because of my activity with Marcus, and because of my PhD work, I have 19 provisional patents, PCT applications, and international and national utility patents at different stages in prosecution. Now, we realize that we have fancy resumes for some mid-20-something-year-olds, but we don't have a lot of the experience that a lot of you have in this room. And we're looking for some of you to come on board, but we also have a very extensive advisory board, including Dave Giddings, who's been around the industry for 40 years and was previously the chief operating officer and president of Boehringer Mannheim, which is now Roche Diagnostics. So if you have any questions, we'd love to answer them.